In the grand halls of Valdoria Palace, where centuries of royal secrets lie buried beneath marble floors and gilded portraits, a single photograph hidden in a guard's uniform pocket holds the power to destroy a kingdom. Captain Marcus Reed never imagined that his routine security detail would uncover a conspiracy so deep, so devastating, that it would force him to choose between his sworn duty to protect the crown and his moral obligation to expose the truth. As Princess Isabella returns from her diplomatic mission abroad, she walks unknowingly into a web of deception spun by the very woman who raised her after her mother's mysterious death 15 years ago. The woman the kingdom reveres as the beloved Queen Regent, Lady Vivian Ashford, harbors a secret so dark that it threatens not only Isabella's rightful claim to the throne but the very foundation of the monarchy itself. What Marcus discovered in those forbidden archives wasn't just evidence of betrayal, it was proof of murder, manipulation, and a carefully orchestrated plan that has been decades in the making. Now, as the palace prepares for the grandest celebration in Valdoria's history to welcome Princess Isabella home, Marcus must find the courage to approach her with evidence that will shatter everything she believes about her family, her past, and her destiny. The question isn't whether the truth will come to light, it's whether the kingdom will survive when it does. The autumn rain drummed against the towering windows of Valdoria Palace as Captain Marcus Reed stood at attention in the grand entrance hall, his ceremonial uniform pressed to perfection, his mind anything but calm. After 12 years of faithful service to the royal family, Marcus had never questioned his loyalty to the crown. But the manila envelope hidden beneath his jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, each piece of evidence inside threatening to bring down everything he had sworn to protect. Princess Isabella's motorcade was expected within the hour, returning from her 6-month diplomatic tour of neighboring kingdoms. The palace buzzed with preparation for her homecoming celebration, scheduled for tomorrow evening. Servants hurried through the corridors with fresh flowers, the kitchen staff worked frantically on the welcome feast, and Lady Vivian Ashford, the Queen Regent who had ruled in Isabella's absence, supervised every detail with her characteristic precision and grace. Marcus watched Lady Vivian glide across the marble floor, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her midnight blue gown flowing behind her like liquid silk. To everyone in the kingdom, she was the picture of noble dignity, the woman who had stepped in to guide Valdoria after Queen Elena's tragic death 15 years ago, who had raised Princess Isabella as her own daughter, and who had maintained peace and prosperity throughout her regency. But Marcus now knew the truth about the woman behind the carefully constructed facade. It had started 3 weeks ago during a routine security sweep of the palace archives. Marcus had been checking the old storage rooms in the East Wing when he discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose stone in the wall. Inside, he found documents that shouldn't have existed, photographs that should have been destroyed, and correspondence that painted a picture so horrifying that Marcus had initially refused to believe it. The first document was a physician's report dated just days before Queen Elena's death, declaring her to be in perfect health despite the official story of her sudden illness. The second was a letter in Lady Vivian's handwriting, discussing payment to a man named Dr. Aldrich Thorne for services rendered and his discretion regarding the Queen's condition. The third was a bank statement showing large payments from Lady Vivian's personal account to various individuals, including several palace guards who had mysteriously left service shortly after Queen Elena's death. But it was the photographs that had made Marcus's blood run cold. Pictures of Lady Vivian meeting with foreign agents, documents showing her correspondence with enemy kingdoms, and, most damning of all, a photograph of her placing something in Queen Elena's evening tea on the night she died. Dr. Thorne, it turned out, had kept insurance against his own blackmail, documenting everything before his own convenient disappearance 5 years later. As Marcus stood in the Grand Hall, watching Lady Vivian orchestrate the welcome preparations with such warmth and apparent devotion to Isabella, he struggled to reconcile the loving guardian he had observed for years with the calculated murderer revealed in those documents. The evidence suggested that Lady Vivian had poisoned Queen Elena, arranged for the removal of witnesses, and spent 15 years positioning herself as Isabella's most trusted advisor while secretly working to undermine Valdoria's sovereignty. The great doors of the palace swung open, and the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the courtyard. Princess Isabella had arrived. Marcus straightened his shoulders, knowing that in a few short hours, he would have to find a way to approach her with information that would destroy her world. Isabella trusted Lady Vivian completely, had grown up calling her Aunt Vivian, and considered her the closest thing to a mother she had ever known. Isabella entered the grand hall like a breath of fresh air after the storm. At 26, she had grown into a woman of remarkable grace and intelligence, her dark hair catching the light from the crystal chandeliers, her green eyes bright with happiness at being home. She moved with the confidence of someone born to rule, yet without the arrogance that often accompanied royal birth. The diplomatic tour had clearly suited her well, her face glowing with health and satisfaction at a mission successfully completed. Lady Vivian approached Isabella with open arms, and Marcus watched the tender reunion between the two women. Isabella embraced her guardian with genuine affection, immediately launching into animated stories about her travels and the progress she had made in strengthening Valdoria's alliances with neighboring kingdoms. Lady Vivian listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions and expressing pride in Isabella's accomplishments. "My dear child, you've exceeded every expectation," Lady Vivian said, her voice warm with maternal affection. "The kingdom has eagerly awaited your return. Tomorrow's celebration will be magnificent, a true homecoming for our future queen." Marcus observed the interaction with new eyes, noting how Lady Vivian subtly steered the conversation away from certain topics, how she positioned herself as the source of all important information about the kingdom's affairs, and how she gently discouraged Isabella from meeting with certain ministers and advisors until after the celebration. What had once seemed like protective care now appeared to be calculated control. The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of activity as Isabella settled back into palace life. Marcus maintained his position as her primary security detail, staying close enough to observe but struggling with when and how to approach her with the devastating evidence. He knew that timing would be everything. If he revealed the truth too early or in the wrong circumstances, Lady Vivian would have the opportunity to spin the narrative, discredit him, or worse, silence him permanently. As evening approached, Marcus noticed increased activity in Lady Vivian's private wing of the palace. Several individuals he didn't recognize entered through the servants' entrance and made their way to her chambers. Through careful observation, he identified them as the same foreign agents from the photographs he had discovered. Lady Vivian was hosting a secret meeting on the very night of Isabella's return, and Marcus knew this could not be a coincidence. Using his security clearance, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the meeting without being detected. Through the partially open door of Lady Vivian's study, he watched as she met with three men dressed in dark clothing. Maps of Valdoria were spread across the large oak table, along with documents that appeared to be military in nature. The conversation was conducted in hushed tones, but Marcus caught fragments that chilled him to the bone. "The princess suspects nothing," Lady Vivian was saying. "Tomorrow's celebration will provide the perfect cover. Once the marriage alliance with Prince Victor is announced, Valdoria's military resources will be at our disposal. The merger of the kingdoms will appear voluntary, a romantic union rather than a hostile takeover." One of the men leaned forward, his accent clearly marking him as foreign. "And if she refuses the marriage?" Lady Vivian's laugh was cold and calculating. "Isabella has never refused anything I've advised. She trusts me completely. And if for some reason she should prove difficult, well, accidents do happen. The kingdom grieved for one beloved royal who died young. They would grieve again, but they would accept Victor as their ruler to maintain stability." Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as the full scope of Lady Vivian's betrayal became clear. She had not only murdered Queen Elena but had spent 15 years grooming Isabella to be either a puppet ruler or a convenient sacrifice. The diplomatic mission had been orchestrated to keep Isabella away while final preparations were made. The homecoming celebration would serve as the stage for either Isabella's unwitting agreement to her own enslavement or her public elimination. As the meeting concluded and the foreign agents departed through the shadows, Marcus realized that he had perhaps 24 hours to save not only Princess Isabella's life but the independence of the entire kingdom. The evidence in his possession would expose Lady Vivian's crimes, but he needed to find a way to present it to Isabella in a manner that would convince her to take action before the celebration tomorrow night. The challenge would be enormous. Isabella had grown up believing Lady Vivian was her salvation after her mother's death. She had been taught to see Vivian as wise, caring, and completely devoted to Valdoria's welfare. Convincing her that the woman she loved as a mother was actually her mother's murderer and her own greatest threat would require not just evidence, but impeccable timing and careful presentation. Marcus returned to his quarters that night knowing that sleep would be impossible. He spread the documents across his small desk, studying every detail, planning his approach. He would have one chance to save Princess Isabella and expose the conspiracy that threatened the kingdom. If he failed, both he and the princess would likely be dead within days, and Valdoria would fall under foreign control without its people ever knowing what had happened. The weight of the kingdom's future rested on his shoulders, and Marcus Reed, loyal guard and devoted servant of the crown, prepared for the most important conversation of his life. Tomorrow, he would approach Princess Isabella with evidence that would change everything, and pray that she would have the courage to believe the unthinkable truth about the woman she called family. As the palace settled into quiet for the night, Marcus sat by his window, looking out at the gardens where Queen Elena had once walked with her young daughter Isabella. He thought about the trust that had been placed in him, not just by his oath to protect the royal family, but by a murdered queen whose justice had waited 15 years to come to light. Tomorrow would bring either salvation or destruction, and Marcus knew that the decision would ultimately rest in Princess Isabella's hands. Dawn broke over Valdoria Palace with deceptive beauty, the morning sun casting golden light across the manicured gardens and gleaming turrets. Princess Isabella woke in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by familiar tapestries and the scent of jasmine from the garden below. For a moment, she felt the simple joy of being home, but something nagged at the edges of her consciousness, a subtle wrongness she couldn't quite identify. Captain Marcus Reed had spent the sleepless night refining his strategy. He needed to approach Isabella when she would be alone, away from Lady Vivian's watchful eyes and the constant presence of other palace staff. His opportunity came during Isabella's morning routine, which he knew included a private walk through the Queen's Garden, a secluded area of the palace grounds that had been her mother's favorite retreat. Isabella made her way through the familiar paths, breathing in the crisp autumn air and admiring how well the gardeners had maintained her mother's beloved roses. She paused at the marble bench where Queen Elena had often sat to read, running her fingers along the smooth stone. It was here that Marcus chose to make his approach, emerging from behind a grove of silver birch trees with measured steps. "Your Highness," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Might I have a word? It's a matter of utmost importance." Isabella turned, surprised to see her usually formal guard captain looking so distressed. In all the years she had known Marcus, she had never seen him appear anything other than completely composed. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his usually immaculate uniform showing subtle signs of a sleepless night, and his brown eyes held a gravity that immediately captured her attention. "Of course, Marcus," Isabella replied, gesturing for him to join her on the bench. "You look troubled. What's wrong?" Marcus sat carefully, maintaining a respectful distance while pulling the manila envelope from his jacket. His hands trembled slightly as he held it, and Isabella noticed the tremor with growing concern. "Your Highness, what I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you believe about your family, your past, and the people you trust most," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his obvious emotional turmoil. "I've served this palace for 12 years, and I've never questioned my loyalty to the crown. But 3 weeks ago, I discovered something that changes everything." Isabella's brow furrowed as she studied Marcus's face. She had always respected his judgment and integrity, but his words seemed to suggest something almost unthinkable. "What kind of discovery?" Marcus opened the envelope and withdrew the first document, the physician's report declaring Queen Elena to be in perfect health just days before her supposed death from sudden illness. Isabella took the paper with shaking hands, reading the familiar letterhead of the royal physician and the date that preceded her mother's death by mere days. "This is impossible," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze rustling through the leaves. "Mother died of a sudden fever. Everyone knows that. The entire kingdom mourned her unexpected illness." "That's what we were all told," Marcus replied gently. "But this report shows your mother was examined thoroughly and found to be in excellent health." The physician noted her strong constitution and lack of any symptoms that would suggest impending illness. Isabella stared at the document, her mind racing to find an explanation that would reconcile this evidence with what she had always believed. Perhaps there was an error, or maybe the illness came on so suddenly that this examination missed the early signs. Marcus withdrew the second document, Lady Vivian's letter discussing payment to Dr. Aldrich Thorne. Isabella's face paled as she recognized the handwriting, her guardian's distinctive flowing script discussing services rendered and discretion regarding the Queen's condition. "I don't understand," Isabella said, her voice growing smaller. "Why would Aunt Vivian be paying the physician for discretion? What condition are they referring to?" "Keep reading," Marcus said softly, producing the bank statements that showed the pattern of payments to various individuals, including several guards who had left service immediately after Queen Elena's death. "These payments all occurred within weeks of your mother's death, and every person who received money either disappeared or left the palace permanently." Isabella's hands were now visibly shaking as she examined the financial records. The woman who had raised her, who had comforted her through nightmares and celebrated her achievements, who had taught her everything she knew about ruling with wisdom and compassion, could this same woman have been involved in something sinister? "There must be an explanation," Isabella insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Aunt Vivian loved my mother like a sister. She's dedicated her entire life to protecting me and serving the kingdom. Why would she?" Isabella couldn't finish the sentence, the implications too horrible to voice. Marcus's heart ached as he watched the princess struggle to process information that shattered her fundamental understanding of her world. But he knew he had to show her everything, especially the photographic evidence that would be impossible to dismiss. "Your Highness, there's more," Marcus said, withdrawing the first photograph. "This was taken the night your mother died." The black and white image showed Lady Vivian in Queen Elena's private chambers, captured in the act of adding something to a teacup on the bedside table. The photographer had positioned themselves carefully to document the moment, and Lady Vivian's face was clearly visible in profile as she sprinkled powder from a small vial into the tea. Isabella stared at the photograph for a long moment, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Where did you find this? Who took this picture?" "Dr. Aldrich Thorne, the physician mentioned in the letter," Marcus explained. "It appears he documented everything as insurance against blackmail. He kept these records hidden until his own mysterious disappearance 5 years ago." The implications crashed over Isabella like a tide. Her mother hadn't died of natural causes. The woman she loved as a second mother had deliberately poisoned Queen Elena, then spent 15 years carefully crafting herself into Isabella's most trusted advisor. Every moment of care, every piece of guidance, every expression of love had been built on the foundation of murder. "I feel sick," Isabella whispered, clutching the marble bench for support. "This can't be real. People don't do things like this. Aunt Vivian has been nothing but devoted to me and to Valdoria." Marcus produced the final set of photographs, images of Lady Vivian meeting with foreign agents, including some taken as recently as the previous evening. Isabella recognized the faces from intelligence briefings she had received about potential threats to Valdoria's security. "These meetings have been happening throughout your diplomatic tour," Marcus explained. "The agents you're looking at represent interests hostile to Valdoria's independence. Last night, I overheard a conversation that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy." Isabella looked up sharply, her green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "What conversation?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either convince Isabella completely or cause her to dismiss everything he had shown her. "Lady Vivian is planning to announce your engagement to Prince Victor of Moravia at tonight's celebration. The marriage alliance is designed to give foreign interests control over Valdoria's resources and military. If you refuse the marriage, she plans to arrange for your death and install Victor as ruler." The color drained completely from Isabella's face as the full horror of her situation became clear. She was trapped in her own palace, surrounded by people she had trusted, with her life hanging in the balance of a conspiracy that had been 15 years in the making. "Prince Victor," Isabella repeated numbly. "I've never even met him. How could Aunt Vivian arrange a marriage without my knowledge?" "She's been corresponding with Moravian interests throughout your tour," Marcus explained. "The diplomatic mission itself was designed to keep you away while final arrangements were made. Your successful negotiations with other kingdoms were meant to demonstrate your value as either a puppet ruler or a martyr whose death would unite Valdoria behind a foreign prince." Isabella stood abruptly, pacing away from the bench as she struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Everything she had accomplished, every moment of pride in her diplomatic successes, had been orchestrated by the woman who had murdered her mother and planned to destroy her kingdom. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking. "If what you're saying is true, then I can't trust anyone in the palace. The guards, the servants, the advisors, how many of them are loyal to Aunt Vivian rather than to the crown?" Marcus stood as well, his military bearing returning as he shifted into protective mode. "That's exactly what we need to determine, Your Highness. But, first, we need to ensure your safety through tonight's celebration. Lady Vivian cannot suspect that you know the truth, or she may accelerate her timeline." Isabella's mind raced as she considered the impossible position she was in. She had to appear normal and trusting at the very celebration that was meant to either trap her or kill her. She had to smile at the woman who had murdered her mother while pretending to love the daughter. She had to navigate a palace full of people whose loyalties were unknown, knowing that any wrong word or suspicious action could seal her fate. "How many people know about this evidence?" Isabella asked, her voice stronger now as her royal training kicked in. Despite the emotional devastation, she was beginning to think strategically about survival and protecting her kingdom. "Only myself, Your Highness," Marcus replied. "I've told no one else because I wasn't certain who could be trusted. But we'll need to identify allies quickly if we're going to survive this." Isabella nodded, her resolve hardening even as her heart continued to break. "We need to get these documents to someone outside the palace, someone who can ensure they become public if something happens to us. And we need to find a way to gather evidence of tonight's plan without alerting Aunt Vivian to our suspicions." As they discussed strategy, Isabella found herself studying Marcus with new appreciation. This man had risked everything to bring her this information, knowing that he could easily have been executed for treason if the evidence was discovered. His loyalty to the crown and to justice had driven him to act despite the enormous personal risk. The morning sun climbed higher as they planned their approach to the day ahead. Isabella would return to the palace and behave normally, attending the preparation meetings and appearing excited about the evening's celebration. Marcus would use his security position to gather intelligence about Lady Vivian's associates and identify which guards and staff members might be trustworthy. But, as they prepared to part ways, Isabella felt the full weight of her isolation settling over her. In the space of an hour, she had lost not only her beloved guardian but her sense of safety and belonging in her own home. Tonight, she would have to face Lady Vivian across the dinner table, smile at her toasts, and accept her congratulations, all while knowing that this woman had killed her mother and planned to destroy her kingdom. The little girl who had cried in Lady Vivian's arms after her mother's death was gone forever, replaced by a young queen who now understood that survival meant accepting terrible truths about the people we love most. The hours following Isabella's discovery passed in a haze of carefully controlled performance. Returning to the palace after her devastating conversation with Marcus, she forced herself to smile and express enthusiasm for the evening's celebration while her mind reeled with the knowledge of Lady Vivian's betrayal. Every interaction with her guardian felt surreal, as if she were watching herself participate in an elaborate theater production where the stakes were life and death. Lady Vivian greeted Isabella's return from her morning walk with characteristic warmth, inquiring about her rest and expressing excitement about the day's preparations. As they reviewed the evening schedule over breakfast in the morning room, Isabella found herself studying Vivian's face with new eyes, searching for signs of deception she had never noticed before. The older woman's silver hair was perfectly styled, her posture elegant as always, and her expression radiating the maternal affection that had comforted Isabella through countless difficulties over the years. "The guest list has exceeded our expectations," Vivian said, buttering a piece of toast with delicate precision. "Representatives from 7 neighboring kingdoms will be attending, including some very prestigious delegations. It will be a wonderful opportunity to strengthen Valdoria's position in the region." Isabella nodded, forcing enthusiasm into her voice while internally cataloging each detail that might support Marcus's warnings. "How marvelous! I'm particularly interested in meeting the Moravian delegation. I understand Prince Victor will be attending?" The slight pause in Vivian's butter spreading was so brief that Isabella might have missed it if she hadn't been watching carefully. When Vivian looked up, her smile was perfectly composed, but there was something calculating in her eyes that Isabella had never noticed before. Indeed, Prince Victor specifically requested to attend upon hearing of your return, Vivian replied smoothly. He's quite eager to discuss potential diplomatic arrangements between our kingdoms. He's a remarkable young man, well-educated and very handsome. I think you'll find him quite charming. The way Vivian emphasized Victor's personal qualities rather than his political credentials sent chills down Isabella's spine. This was exactly the kind of subtle maneuvering that Marcus had warned her about. Vivian was already laying the groundwork for the engagement announcement, preparing Isabella to view Victor favorably before they had even met. I look forward to meeting him, Isabella managed, though her stomach churned with anxiety. What sort of diplomatic arrangements are being discussed? Again, that microscopic pause. Oh, nothing formal yet, my dear. Just exploratory conversations about trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Victor is very forward-thinking about regional cooperation. Isabella excused herself after breakfast, claiming she needed to review her wardrobe for the evening. In truth, she needed time to process what she was learning and to meet with Marcus to share her observations. The way Vivian spoke about Victor suggested an intimacy with his plans that went far beyond casual diplomatic interest. Marcus had positioned himself strategically in the palace corridors, using his security duties to observe the increased activity surrounding the evening's celebration. He noted the arrival of additional staff members he didn't recognize, the presence of foreign dignitaries who had arrived earlier than scheduled, and, most concerning, the movement of several guards who seemed to be taking orders from someone other than the captain of the guard. When Isabella found Marcus near the servants' staircase leading to her private chambers, he immediately noticed the strain in her expression. They spoke in hushed tones, aware that the palace walls seemed to have more ears than usual. She's already preparing me to like Prince Victor, Isabella whispered. The way she described him was far too personal for a simple diplomatic meeting. And she was evasive about the specific nature of their discussions. Marcus nodded grimly. I've been observing the preparations, and there are several irregularities. Guards I don't recognize, staff members who aren't on the official roster, and unusual security arrangements that weren't approved through normal channels. Someone is orchestrating additional elements for tonight that the regular palace staff doesn't know about. They agreed that Isabella would continue to play her role throughout the day while Marcus worked to identify trustworthy allies among the palace staff. The challenge was enormous. After 15 years of Vivian's influence, it was impossible to know how deeply the conspiracy had penetrated the palace hierarchy. The afternoon brought a parade of fittings, rehearsals, and meetings that tested Isabella's acting abilities to their limits. Lady Vivian was omnipresent, supervising every detail with an attention that Isabella now recognized as controlling rather than caring. When the palace historian arrived to brief Isabella on Moravian customs and traditions, Vivian insisted on sitting in on the session, occasionally steering the conversation toward topics that portrayed Victor and his kingdom in an especially favorable light. Prince Victor is known for his progressive views on governance, the historian explained, apparently unaware of any underlying agenda. He believes in collaborative leadership and has often spoken about the benefits of uniting smaller kingdoms under common leadership for mutual protection and prosperity. Isabella's blood ran cold as she recognized the coded language. Victor's collaborative leadership and belief in uniting smaller kingdoms sounded exactly like the conquest strategy Marcus had overheard Lady Vivian discussing with the foreign agents. As the afternoon wore on, Isabella began to notice other subtle signs that confirmed her worst fears. Servants she had known her entire life seemed nervous and avoided making direct eye contact. Guards who had been friendly and familiar suddenly appeared formal and distant. Even the kitchen staff, normally bustling with cheerful energy during major celebrations, worked with an undercurrent of tension that suggested they sensed something was wrong. The most chilling moment came during the final wardrobe consultation, when Lady Vivian presented Isabella with a magnificent gown that had supposedly been created specifically for the evening's celebration. The dress was breathtaking, deep royal blue silk with intricate silver embroidery and sapphires that matched the crown jewels. But, when Isabella examined the gown more closely, she realized it was designed in the style worn by Moravian nobility, not Valdorian tradition. It's beautiful, Aunt Vivian, but the design seems unusual for a Valdorian celebration, Isabella observed carefully. I thought it would be lovely to incorporate some international influences, Vivian replied without missing a beat. After all, tonight is about Valdoria's place in the broader community of kingdoms. The seamstress assured me that this style would be particularly flattering for the evening's festivities. Isabella accepted the explanation gracefully, but, internally she was horrified. Even her clothing for the evening had been chosen to prepare her for her new role as a Moravian princess rather than to celebrate her return as Valdoria's future queen. Every detail had been orchestrated to support the narrative that would be presented to the kingdom tonight. As evening approached, Marcus made a disturbing discovery that confirmed their worst suspicions. While conducting a routine security check of the palace kitchens, he observed several staff members he didn't recognize preparing special dishes that weren't on the official menu. When he inquired about the additional food, he was told they were special requests from Lady Vivian for important guests. More alarming still, Marcus witnessed one of the unknown staff members adding something from a small vial to a pitcher of wine. When confronted, the man claimed it was a special preservative to ensure the wine remained fresh throughout the evening, but Marcus's training had taught him to recognize suspicious behavior. He discreetly followed the wine service and discovered it was designated specifically for Princess Isabella's table. The implications were terrifying. If Isabella couldn't trust the food and drink at her own homecoming celebration, then Lady Vivian was prepared to use any means necessary to ensure the evening proceeded according to plan. Whether the additive was intended to make Isabella more compliant, to incapacitate her, or worse, Marcus couldn't determine, but he knew they had to assume the worst. As the sun began to set over Valdoria Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyards and gardens, Isabella prepared for what might be the most dangerous evening of her life. She would have to navigate a celebration designed to trap her, surrounded by people whose loyalties were uncertain, while maintaining the pretense that she trusted the woman who had murdered her mother. The palace glittered with thousands of candles and crystal chandeliers as guests began to arrive for the celebration. Isabella stood before her mirror, allowing her maid to make final adjustments to the treacherous Moravian gown, and steeled herself for the performance of her lifetime. She thought of her mother, who had died without knowing the truth about the woman she had trusted, and resolved that Queen Elena's death would not be in vain. Tonight, Princess Isabella would either expose the conspiracy that threatened her kingdom or die in the attempt. But she would not go quietly into the trap that had been so carefully laid for her. Marcus would be watching from his position among the guards, and together they would find a way to reveal the truth before Lady Vivian could complete her 15-year plan of betrayal. As Isabella made her way to the grand ballroom where hundreds of guests awaited her arrival, she carried herself with the dignity of a true queen, even though she knew she was walking into the most dangerous situation of her life. The girl who had trusted blindly was gone, replaced by a woman determined to protect her kingdom from the enemy who had hidden in plain sight for far too long. The grand ballroom of Valdoria Palace had been transformed into a breathtaking spectacle of light and luxury, with crystal chandeliers casting prismatic rainbows across the marble floors and elaborate floral arrangements filling the air with the scent of roses and jasmine. Distinguished guests from across the region mingled in their finest attire, the gentle murmur of diplomatic conversations creating an atmosphere of sophisticated celebration. To any observer, this appeared to be the perfect homecoming for a beloved princess, but Isabella felt as though she were walking into a beautifully decorated trap. As she descended the grand staircase, resplendent in the Moravian-styled gown that now felt like a costume for her own deception, Isabella caught sight of Prince Victor for the first time. He stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by his Moravian entourage, and she had to admit that Lady Vivian's description had been accurate. He was indeed handsome, with dark hair, striking blue eyes, and the confident bearing of someone born to power. But there was something calculating in his gaze as he watched her approach, a coldness that suggested he viewed her more as a political acquisition than a potential bride. Lady Vivian appeared at Isabella's side almost immediately, her face glowing with what appeared to be genuine pride and affection. To anyone watching, she was the devoted guardian celebrating her ward's triumphant return. But Isabella now noticed details she had previously overlooked: the way Vivian's eyes constantly scanned the room, monitoring reactions and positioning herself to control the flow of conversation, the subtle hand signals she exchanged with certain guests, and, most telling, the way she guided Isabella inexorably toward Prince Victor. "My dear, you look absolutely radiant," Vivian said warmly, taking Isabella's arm in a gesture that appeared protective but felt possessive. "Come, there are so many people eager to welcome you home. Prince Victor has been particularly anxious to make your acquaintance." Isabella allowed herself to be led through the crowd, accepting congratulations and exchanging pleasantries while internally cataloging every face, every interaction, every subtle sign that might indicate friend or foe. The foreign diplomats seemed genuinely pleased to see her, discussing the successful trade negotiations she had conducted during her tour. But she noticed that several of the Valdorian nobles appeared nervous, their smiles forced and their conversations stilted, as if they were participating in something they didn't fully understand but feared to question. Marcus maintained his position among the royal guards, his trained eye sweeping the room for potential threats while keeping Isabella within his line of sight. He had identified several guards who weren't part of the regular palace security detail, men who stood with military precision but whose allegiances were clearly elsewhere. More concerning, he had spotted 3 of the foreign agents from the photographs, now dressed as distinguished guests but positioned strategically around the ballroom's exits. When Lady Vivian finally brought Isabella before Prince Victor, the introductions were performed with elaborate ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a social meeting. Victor bowed with practiced elegance, his English accented but fluent as he expressed his pleasure at finally meeting the famous Princess Isabella. "Your Highness, your reputation for diplomatic excellence precedes you," Victor said, taking her hand and kissing it in the traditional manner. "I've heard remarkable reports of your recent mission to strengthen regional alliances. Moravia would be honored to explore similar partnerships with Valdoria." Isabella smiled graciously while studying Victor's face for signs of the conspiracy she knew lay beneath his polite words. "Thank you, Your Highness. I'm always interested in fostering relationships that benefit our mutual prosperity and security." As they spoke, Lady Vivian excused herself briefly, citing the need to ensure other guests were properly attended. Isabella noticed that Vivian's departure seemed to be a signal, as several key individuals began moving to predetermined positions around the ballroom. Marcus, observing the same movement, tensed with recognition that some planned event was about to unfold. Victor continued the conversation with practiced charm, discussing his vision for regional cooperation and the benefits of strong alliances between neighboring kingdoms. But Isabella detected an underlying assumption in his words. He spoke not as someone hoping to negotiate future agreements, but as someone who already considered certain arrangements to be settled. "I believe that smaller kingdoms like ours must unite to remain relevant in an increasingly complex world," Victor said, his blue eyes fixing on hers with unsettling intensity. "Individual sovereignty is becoming a luxury that many nations can no longer afford. Partnership, even intimate partnership, is the path to security and prosperity." The word intimate made Isabella's skin crawl, particularly given the context Marcus had provided about the planned engagement announcement. Victor wasn't merely suggesting political alliance, he was preparing her for the personal sacrifice that would be demanded of her. Before Isabella could respond, the sound of crystal chiming filled the ballroom as Lady Vivian called for attention. The guests turned expectantly as Vivian ascended the small dais where the palace musicians had been playing, her presence commanding immediate silence. "My dear friends, fellow nobles, and honored guests," Vivian began, her voice carrying easily across the now quiet ballroom. "We gathered tonight to celebrate the return of our beloved Princess Isabella, whose diplomatic mission has brought great honor to Valdoria and strengthened our position among the kingdoms of our region." The applause was enthusiastic, and Isabella acknowledged it with a gracious wave, even as her heart hammered with anticipation of what would come next. She noticed that Marcus had positioned himself closer to the dais, his hand resting casually near his sword hilt. "But tonight marks more than just a homecoming," Vivian continued, her smile radiant as she gestured toward Isabella and Victor. "It marks the beginning of a new chapter in Valdoria's history, one that will secure our kingdom's future through the strongest possible bonds of friendship and alliance." Isabella felt Victor move closer to her side, his presence suddenly feeling like a trap closing around her. The foreign agents Marcus had identified were now clearly visible, their attention focused on key exit points and potential sources of disruption. "It is my great joy to announce the engagement of Princess Isabella to Prince Victor of Moravia," Vivian declared, her voice ringing with triumph. "Their union will create a partnership that ensures peace, prosperity, and security for both our great kingdoms." The ballroom erupted in applause, but Isabella stood frozen in shock despite having anticipated this moment. The reality of hearing her life decided without her consent, proclaimed to hundreds of witnesses as a fait accompli, was more devastating than she had imagined. She looked up at Lady Vivian, seeing the woman's satisfaction at having successfully orchestrated this coup, and felt a rage so pure and fierce that it temporarily overwhelmed her fear. Victor took her hand, raising it in a gesture of shared victory that to the crowd appeared romantic but, to Isabella felt like shackles being locked around her wrists. "I am honored beyond measure to unite my future with that of such a remarkable princess," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Together, our kingdoms will prosper in ways neither could achieve alone." Isabella knew that this was the critical moment. She could play along, accepting the engagement and hoping for an opportunity to escape later, or she could make her stand now, in front of hundreds of witnesses, with no guarantee of survival but with the chance to expose the truth before it was too late. Marcus watched from his position near the dais, recognizing the trapped expression on Isabella's face and knowing that the moment of decision had arrived. He had positioned himself where he could act quickly, but any move he made would have to be perfectly timed and completely decisive. Isabella looked out over the crowd of nobles and dignitaries, people who had known her since childhood, who had served her family loyally, who believed they were witnessing a joyous announcement rather than the conquest of their kingdom. She thought of her mother, murdered in her bed by the woman now orchestrating this elaborate betrayal, and made her choice. "Your Highness," Isabella said to Victor, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly hushed ballroom, "I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding." The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Vivian's confident smile faltered slightly as she realized that Isabella was not following the expected script. Victor's hand tightened on hers, his charming mask beginning to slip. "I have never agreed to any engagement," Isabella continued, her royal training allowing her to project her voice with authority and clarity. "While I appreciate Moravia's interest in strengthening diplomatic ties, I do not consent to this marriage, and any announcement of such an arrangement has been made without my knowledge or approval." The crowd began to murmur with confusion and concern. This was clearly not the celebration they had expected, and the political implications of a rejected engagement were immediately obvious to anyone familiar with diplomatic protocol. Lady Vivian stepped forward quickly, her voice smooth but her eyes flashing with barely contained anger. "My dear Isabella, I think the excitement of the evening and the joy of being home has overwhelmed you. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately." But Isabella had made her decision, and there was no turning back. "I am not overwhelmed, Aunt Vivian. I am perfectly clear about what I do and do not consent to. And I do not consent to having my future decided without my participation." The ballroom was now buzzing with shocked whispers as guests tried to understand what they were witnessing. Marcus moved closer, knowing that events were about to spiral beyond anyone's control and that Isabella would need protection very soon. Victor released Isabella's hand, his facade of charming suitor disappearing entirely. "Your Highness, I believe you misunderstand the situation. This arrangement has been carefully negotiated for the benefit of both our kingdoms. Your personal preferences, while understandable, cannot supersede the greater good." The threat in his words was clear to Isabella, and she realized that the polite fiction of courtship was about to be abandoned entirely. She was no longer dealing with a diplomatic proposal but with a hostile takeover that had been disguised as a romantic alliance. Lady Vivian's mask was also beginning to slip, her maternal warmth replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "Isabella, dear child, you're being impulsive. This alliance has been planned for your benefit and for Valdoria's security. You must trust those who love you and have your best interests at heart." Isabella looked directly at Lady Vivian, and, in that moment, 15 years of deception and manipulation crystallized into perfect clarity. "Trust those who love me," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. "Tell me, Aunt Vivian, what happened to my mother?" The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Isabella's words, "Tell me, Aunt Vivian, what happened to my mother," silenced the entire ballroom as if the very walls held their breath. Lady Vivian's composure cracked for just an instant, a flash of something dark and calculating crossing her features before she quickly recovered her maternal expression. "Isabella, darling, what a strange question to ask at such a moment," Vivian said, her voice carefully modulated to suggest concern for Isabella's mental state rather than alarm at the question itself. "Your mother died of a sudden fever 15 years ago. You know this. The grief and stress of tonight's celebration must be affecting your judgment. But Isabella had seen that momentary crack in Vivian's facade, and it confirmed everything Marcus had shown her that morning. She straightened her shoulders, drawing upon generations of royal authority as she addressed not just Vivian, but the entire assembly of nobles and dignitaries who were witnessing this confrontation. "Captain Reed," Isabella called out clearly, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of royal command. "Please join me here." Marcus stepped forward from his position among the guards, his bearing military straight as he approached the dais. The foreign agents Isabella had noticed positioned around the room tensed visibly, clearly recognizing that their carefully orchestrated evening was rapidly spinning out of control. "Captain Reed has made some disturbing discoveries that I believe this assembly should hear," Isabella announced, ignoring Lady Vivian's sharp intake of breath and Prince Victor's darkening expression. "Discoveries about the true circumstances of Queen Elena's death and the events leading up to tonight's celebration." The crowd of guests stirred uneasily, sensing that they were about to witness something far more significant than a simple rejection of a marriage proposal. Several of the Valdorian nobles moved closer, their loyalty to the crown overriding their confusion about what was unfolding before them. Lady Vivian stepped forward quickly, her voice taking on an edge of authority that she rarely displayed publicly. "Isabella, you're being manipulated by dangerous people who seek to undermine the stability of the kingdom. Captain Reed has been feeding you lies designed to turn you against those who love you most." "Then, you won't object to hearing what evidence he's discovered," Isabella replied steadily. "If his claims are false, surely the truth will vindicate you." Marcus reached into his uniform and withdrew the manila envelope, its contents now representing the only hope for exposing 15 years of carefully concealed treachery. As he began to speak, his voice carried the authority of a sworn officer reporting to his sovereign. "Your Highness, 3 weeks ago I discovered hidden documents in the palace archives that reveal a conspiracy against the crown," Marcus announced, his words clearly audible throughout the ballroom. "Evidence that Queen Elena was murdered, and that her death was orchestrated by someone with intimate access to the royal family." The gasps from the crowd were immediate and audible. Several guests stepped closer, drawn by the gravity of such accusations, while others began to back toward the exits. Prince Victor made a subtle gesture, and Isabella noticed several of his supposed diplomatic entourage moving to block the main doors. Lady Vivian's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady as she responded. "These are the ravings of a guard who has clearly lost his grip on reality. Queen Elena's death was thoroughly investigated by the royal physicians. To suggest otherwise is not just wrong, but deeply hurtful to all who loved her." Marcus withdrew the first document, the physician's report declaring Queen Elena to be in perfect health just days before her supposed illness. This medical examination, conducted by the royal physician just 4 days before the Queen's death, found her to be in excellent health with no signs of illness or physical distress. He handed the document to Lord Chancellor Aldwin, one of the few palace officials Isabella was certain she could trust, having known him since childhood. The elderly statesman examined the paper carefully, his face grave as he recognized both the letterhead and the signature. "This appears to be authentic," Lord Aldwin announced, his voice heavy with the implications. "I remember this examination being conducted, though we were told the results were routine and unremarkable." "The results were unremarkable," Marcus continued, "which makes the Queen's sudden death from fever just 3 days later highly suspicious." He produced the letter in Lady Vivian's handwriting, discussing payment to Dr. Aldrich Thorne for his discretion regarding the Queen's condition. Lady Vivian's composure finally began to crack as she saw her own handwriting displayed before the assembly. "That letter is taken completely out of context," she said, but her voice lacked its previous confidence. Dr. Thorne was treating the Queen for a private medical matter that required discretion. It had nothing to do with her death. "Then, perhaps you can explain this," Marcus said, producing the photograph of Lady Vivian adding something to Queen Elena's teacup on the night she died. The image passed through the crowd like wildfire, and the reaction was immediate and explosive. Several nobles called out in shock and anger, while others demanded to see the evidence for themselves. Lady Vivian stared at the photograph, and Isabella saw something she had never witnessed before: genuine fear in the woman's eyes. Prince Victor stepped forward aggressively, his diplomatic mask completely abandoned. "This is an obvious fabrication designed to create chaos and undermine legitimate diplomatic negotiations." These documents could have been forged by anyone seeking to destabilize the region. But Marcus was prepared for this objection. The photographer who took this image was Dr. Aldrich Thorne himself, who documented everything as insurance against blackmail. The negatives and additional prints were found with his other records, hidden for 15 years until his own mysterious disappearance. Isabella watched Lady Vivian's face as the full scope of the evidence became clear. The woman who had raised her, who had comforted her through nightmares and celebrated her achievements, was finally revealed as the architect of her mother's murder and her own planned destruction. Furthermore, Marcus continued, just last night I witnessed Lady Vivian meeting with foreign agents to finalize plans for tonight's celebration. Plans that included Princess Isabella's forced marriage to Prince Victor, and her elimination if she refused to cooperate. The ballroom erupted in chaos as the full implications of the conspiracy became clear. Several Valdorian nobles drew their swords, while the Moravian guests clustered around Prince Victor in a defensive formation. The foreign agents Lady Vivian had positioned around the room revealed their true nature, abandoning their diplomatic disguises as weapons appeared in their hands. Lady Vivian finally abandoned all pretense, her voice turning cold and commanding as she addressed the crowd. Enough of this nonsense. The old order is finished. Princess Isabella has proven herself too unstable and naive to rule effectively. Valdoria requires strong leadership that can navigate the complexities of modern politics. Strong leadership like yours? Isabella demanded, her voice ringing with royal authority. Leadership that includes murdering inconvenient queens and forcing their daughters into marriages that serve foreign interests rather than Valdoria's welfare? The confrontation escalated rapidly as Prince Victor signaled to his agents, who began moving to secure key positions in the ballroom. But they had underestimated the loyalty of Valdoria's true nobles, who rallied around Princess Isabella despite their shock at the evening's revelations. Lord Chancellor Aldwin raised his voice above the chaos, his words carrying the weight of legal authority. By the evidence presented and witnessed by this assembly, Lady Vivian Ashford stands accused of high treason, murder of the sovereign, and conspiracy against the crown. Prince Victor and his associates are declared enemies of the state, their diplomatic immunity revoked. The battle for the ballroom began in earnest as loyal Valdorian guards clashed with Victor's agents. Marcus stayed close to Isabella, protecting her as she rallied her supporters and began issuing orders with the natural authority of someone born to rule. Lady Vivian, realizing that her carefully laid plans had completely collapsed, attempted to flee toward the servants' passages she knew so well. But Isabella was not finished with the woman who had stolen 15 years of her life. "Stop her," she commanded, her voice cutting through the sounds of conflict. "She will not escape justice for my mother's murder." The final confrontation came in the palace's great hall, where Lady Vivian found herself cornered by loyal guards and facing the young woman she had manipulated and controlled for so many years. Gone was any pretense of maternal affection, replaced by cold calculation and bitter anger at seeing her long-planned victory slip away. "You foolish girl," Vivian snarled, her true nature finally revealed. "You could have lived comfortably as Victor's wife, bearing heirs to unite the kingdoms peacefully. Instead, you've chosen destruction for yourself and for Valdoria." Isabella faced her mother's murderer with the dignity of a true queen, surrounded by loyal subjects who had seen the truth and chosen to stand with their rightful ruler. "I've chosen freedom, Aunt Vivian. Freedom from your lies, your manipulation, and your treachery. My mother died for Valdoria's independence, and I will not surrender what she died protecting." The conspiracy that had taken 15 years to build crumbled in a single evening. Lady Vivian was arrested and imprisoned, awaiting trial for treason and murder. Prince Victor and his surviving agents were expelled from the kingdom, their marriage alliance rejected and their plans for conquest exposed to neighboring kingdoms who quickly distanced themselves from Moravian aggression. Captain Marcus Reed was elevated to the position of Lord Protector, his loyalty and courage having saved not just Princess Isabella's life but Valdoria's independence. The evidence he had discovered was preserved and made public, ensuring that the truth about Queen Elena's death would never again be hidden. Isabella stood at the window of her mother's former chambers as dawn broke over Valdoria Palace, finally, free to grieve properly for the parent she had lost and to claim her rightful place as the kingdom's protector. The girl who had trusted blindly was gone, replaced by a queen who understood that true strength came from facing difficult truths and standing against those who would exploit love and loyalty for their own gain. The kingdom that had nearly fallen to a carefully orchestrated conspiracy was safe, its future secured by a young woman who had found the courage to question everything she had been taught to believe and the wisdom to distinguish between those who truly served the crown and those who served only themselves. In exposing Lady Vivian's treachery, Isabella had not only avenged her mother's death but ensured that Valdoria would remain free for generations to come.